Welcome back, listeners. It's a pleasure to have you here for Learning from Friends. My name is Cade Curtis, your tour guide on this journey. I hope that you've enjoyed the past couple episodes that have been posted up and beginning to kind of ride along with me on this fantastic journey we're going on. So I have a quote that I'm going to start out with today as continuing with this new segment that I've added in. And the quote of the day, this comes from an excerpt from a book called Big Panda and Tiny Dragon by James Norbury. I feel like I should be doing more, said Tiny Dragon. Try to celebrate the things you have done, said Big Panda, rather than regret the things you haven't. So the topic today that we're going to look at is we'll be discussing music's evolution from the 1950s upwards to today's world from a perspective of a professional percussionist who lived it. So this is someone that has been around the block, been around for a couple of years on it. I hope you enjoy the topics we're going to discuss today. Welcome, my good friend, John.
Hey, Cade. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's a blast to have you. It's interesting that this is my friend, Matt, who I played in a band with throughout high school and part of middle school. This is his father, and he's always over the years been super kind, super courteous to us, always adds an extra bit of humor into every conversation that we have. And sometimes you need that nice kick in the butt to kind of draw you back in. So, John, what do you remember about how we first kind of like met?
Oh, that's easy. It was a club called The Warehouse, and I want to say, was it Marietta?
Kennesaw.
Okay, Kennesaw. Good enough. Off of 41.
Yep.
It was raining. I think it was cold that night. I'm not sure. Anyway, I didn't want to be there because I'm thinking I'm an old guy and I'm going to be around all these kids that are in their teens and they're not going to want me there. I said, but my wife talked me into it. My son talked me into it. So I had to see his band. Well, anyway, I got in there and there was this another guy in there. I'm pretty sure it was the bass player's father.
Yeah.
Was setting up a video cam and arguing with his son about how to run it or whatever. And I thought, no, you know what? This is not going to be good. Well, long story short, the band started playing. They weren't bad. I actually liked them. I said, especially the bass player, which is right here, our host, Cade.
That's me.
He did a backflip. Actually did a backflip on stage with his bass and didn't drop it and didn't drop the lick. I was impressed. So that's how I met Cade.
Yeah, that same show, getting there, I had never met John. We're sitting there unloading all of our stuff, and we're in the back kind of trying to figure out what's going on with the drums before putting them up on stage. And he's sitting there and he's tapping on the drums, tuning it up, tapping it up, tuning it up, and, talking to his son, Matt, and going back and forth. And there's like a little bit of an argument. I go, what's about to happen here? And next thing I know, we take the drums up on stage. And it sounds amazing as we're going through. I'm like, what just happened here? The drums were crap before we got here. No offense to Matt and them, but we didn't know what we were doing for a while on tuning drums. And it turns out it was John who sat back and kind of fixed everything and made it kind of sound better because of who knew? I never knew that he was a professional drummer. It's just kind of one of those oddities. So that's a fun little story there to kind of like lead us in. And ever since we've kind of talked back and forth, we did rehab together, not like rehab, like drug rehab or anything, but I'd messed up my neck and he had his foot that was going back and forth on with pain that you had 2 surgeries on recently.
3.
3. And we were sitting there and next thing you know, I look over and I'm like, John, is that you? And we started talking again. We hadn't seen each other for probably about 5 or 6 years before that.
Yeah.
And then every so often we'll kind of just call and talk. So it's fun little stuff on the little world and how it can connect.
Yeah, that was a horrible time. I was in rehab for 2.5 years at that place.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I don't want to see that again. And it totally ruined my drumming at the time.
The timing, I'm taking it.
Just being able to move my foot for my bass. I no longer can put bass drum is played with heel and toe, trained drummers, and now I just use my toe straight down. Sorry, I didn't mean to get off on a rabbit trail, but
I didn't know that.
Relearning to play drums all over again.
Dang, that's rough.
Yeah.
So today, like when you were born in what year were you born?
Just before Moses, 1951.
So, John, what was it like growing up in the 1950s and 60s?
Well, Cade, that's a loaded question. I mean, we could talk about that for hours, but to condense it as far as my life and what I experienced in music, I can tell you that the 50s was probably for my parents, because I was just 10 years old in 1961. It was probably a new age. The wars, the World War II was over. The Korean conflict was just about over. And you got all these young kids that are in their 20s and they're starting families. And it's like everything was brand new in the 50s. I mean, life was a rainbow. Everyone had a home and new children were being born, which is me, obviously.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I can congratulate my mother, Clara, and my father, John, for having me. I never did tell them that I appreciated being born. So, but then again, until you're 16, I don't think you really know you're alive. I mean, what do you learn from the ages 1 to 16? You're told when to get up, when to go to bed, do your homework, when to eat, when to sleep. You can't go here, you can't go there. So, but the 50s to me that I can remember, was a safe place. It was a place where the families every night got together and we had dinner. Biggest thing, when we got our TV, it was in 1954. And of course, it was black and white. The color TV was around, but it didn't become prevalent till the late 60s, probably middle 60s. But all I remember was a little 10-inch or 12-inch screen that was black and white.
Nice.
So I grew up mainly with radio in the 50s and the early 60s. That's what it was about. TV to me was a novelty.
They were expensive.
Well, they were. Plus, the best time is when we would go shopping on a Saturday. We would go to Sears, and Sears had color TVs back in the middle 60s. And I used to just go there and just sit while my parents would go shopping. Of course, I was already a teenager by then.
Yeah, but still getting to sit down and watch TV in color whenever you had black and white at home.
Oh,
it's different.
Yeah. I mean, you grew up with programs like Batman. Batman was black and white until later. And of course, I was already a teenager then and grew out of it. But anyway. But that was the 50s was more of a day of reckoning. It was a safe place. You had a family. Yeah. Now the 60s, that was different. That was now my parents wanted to give me things that they didn't have. Because obviously growing up in the 20s during the Depression, the 30s was pretty bad. They were just recovering from the Depression. Then bang, World War II. The whole world is engulfed in war. The shortages on fuel, food in the 40s. So now here we are in the 50s. Everything is in abundance, and they want to give their children more. So here we are in the 60s, and schools were better. We had hot lunches every day. We had school buses. Of course, I didn't, because if you lived under a mile, you had to walk to school. And I'm talking about...
Well, that's still nice to live within a mile.
Yeah, well, I lived I was 9/10 of a mile. And when it snowed, I mean, I'm not kidding you. I walked uphill for 5 hours to go to school in the morning, and then uphill to go home, another 5 hours.
So where was it that you grew up at? Like what state, what city, county?
I was born in St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Brighton, Massachusetts. And I grew up in this little town called Walpole, which is 25 miles from Boston. No, I'm sorry, 18 miles from Boston and 18 miles from Providence, Rhode Island. It was right in the center.
So that is cold. Cold winters.
Yeah. And I couldn't wait to get out. But like I was saying earlier, you really don't know what you are until you're like 16. Then you finally realize, wow, I'm a man. I'm growing up. I've got a vision on what I want to do. Before that, I was just preparing. So I always knew I wanted to go to the West Coast. So I graduated high school at 16 and a half. At 17, I was in the West Coast.
So you had a goal, though. What was the goal to go West Coast for?
Music.
Yep.
The whole thing was music. That's what took me to the West Coast.
So you are a professional drummer, musician. How did you get started with that, and at what age?
Oh my, I I was a musician when I was born. I mean, that's another whole story. I can tell you real quickly. My parents were in a pretty bad car accident when she was 7 months pregnant with me.
Oh, wow.
And she, in those days, the cars in the 50s didn't have padded dashboards. They were mainly metal.
Oh,
Some of them had vinyl, but mainly metal. And seatbelts, of course, were not heard of. They were. I guess my father hit the back of a truck that slammed on their brakes because they had hit someone else. But I kept my mom from going through the windshield. Her stomach had hit the dashboard, and I guess her head just tapped the windshield. But I gave her a bump, but it wasn't bad. But they brought her to the hospital, and I wasn't moving.
oh, wow.
So they told my mom that there might be a problem. They could hear a heartbeat, but it was really faint, and they didn't know whether I was going to make it. So the whole 7th month and probably 2/3 of the 8th month, same thing, very, very light heartbeat. And then all of a sudden, my mom said, just before the 9th month, I just started to kick, and she said, "Oh my gosh, it's Uncle Eddie." She said, "I was actually tapping out a beat. Boom, 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 boom,
Wow.
boom, boom." And she'd say, listen, feel the baby. It's going boom, 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 boom. And my dad said, he said, it was a miracle. And they started crying. They said they were hugging each other. They went to the doctors, and the doctor said that my heart was strong, and that he said, "Don't get your hopes up that I might be injured." So, but she kept calling me Uncle Eddie. And I find out later in life that Uncle Eddie was a drummer.
Oh, okay.
So that's why she was calling me a little drummer. And I found this out, by the way. I was in my late 30s when my mom told me the story. And she said, "I always knew you were going to be a drummer." She said, because before you were born, and she told me that story. And I said, "So why did you give me such a hard time in 6th grade when you made me take the violin in the 5th grade, and I wanted to stop it in the 6th grade because I wanted to be a drummer?" And she said,
"It's a good point."
Well, yeah. She said, "I apologize for that." So,
but eventually she supported you to be able to do it.
yeah, she did. Actually, springtime coming, lawn had to be cut and leaves had to be raked. And my father would say to all of us, give us jobs. And he'd say, "John, you go downstairs and play the drums and serenade us." And I'd say, "Yes, sir." So all I had was a snare drum, and it was a plastic snare drum, and it was called Maestro. I'll never forget that. It was Blue Sparkle Maestro drums, and that was in 6th grade. So that's actually when I started to play.
So did you take lessons?
Yeah. Now, we're going to have to jump ahead a little bit.
Oh, go for it.
So 7th grade, there was a store called Leechmere Sales. It's kind of like Sam's Club. You went in and everything was on racks. And this was crazy back in 65, where that you would go into this warehouse type store and you'd buy stuff that was open. Well, I'm going down one of the aisleways, and there it was, the Holy Grail. I just sat on the floor and I started to cry. I looked up and it was a red sparkle set of Ludwigs.
Ooh.
And we're not talking about the little 8-lug bass drum. We're talking about the kind I used to read about, the 10-lug bass drum. And it had a Superphonic 10-lug snare drum. And all they wanted was $199.99, $200 for this set of drums. So, of course, what I did is I got up off of my feet and ran for my father. And I dragged him over and said, "Dad, this is what I've been talking about. This is what I need." And he said, "That's $200. And I said, "I'll work. I'll do anything. I need to have this set." So anyway, we got the guy, the salesman, to come over, and he told us that was the only set of Ludwigs that they had because they didn't have a franchise to sell, and they were told they couldn't take possession of any of them. That was a show. What do they call it?
Show model or
yes,
floor model.
A floor model, and I had to take it as is. And I was a lucky guy.
Yeah, I can only imagine what that set's worth now.
He said it was only put up for a day or two. So he said, we've got everything in the back that goes with it, cowbells, stands. He said, you can have it all. And he said, we can give it to you for $150.
So you're already getting $50 off from what you originally thought.
So I said to my dad, oh, Dad. And he said, you know what? We'll take them. So there were red sparkle. I always wanted blue, but you know what? Red sparkle, it grew on me. So that was I think it was just before Christmas when in my I was seventh grade. It was that seventh grade year, and it was just before Christmas, and I got my drums.
The beginning of the dream.
Beginning of the dream, yeah. So I'm trying to think of how old I was.
Seventh grade, you're about 12, 13 years old.
I think I was going to be 12 because I was already a half a year younger. I went to school when I was 5.5, so I was already a year behind. And I played all that year. I mean, I practiced. Those days you had 45s.
Oh yeah,
and I would put 45s on
and just play along.
Yeah, and play along. Right. Yep. And I realized that, man, you know what? I can do this. It's real easy. It was just natural to me to be able to play.
Well, you already had the rhythm from being in your mom's stomach.
Hey, there you go. I tapped it out. I was doing my rudiments in my mom at the 9th month. Yeah.
So did you go on and take any lessons after that, after you started finding it, or were you all just self-taught?
Yeah, no, I probably didn't start I didn't start taking lessons until I was in the 9th grade. So what had happened was there was a band called The Disciples.
Okay.
And they played a lot of school dances. They were already in high school. Some of them were graduating. I was 12 years old. So I was about 12 and a half. And my brother actually started to play bass with this band, The Disciples. And the singer was a pretty good drummer, but he really liked singing more than he liked playing drums. So it had to be in the spring. So I was 12 and a half years old, and I was at a dance, and this dance was crowded. They probably had 800 or 900 kids. And it was in a hall that this city had. It was called Blackburn Hall.
Oh, cool.
And they were going to play Wipeout.
Yeah.
But the drummer couldn't handle the drums. I remember him saying that, why don't we get John? Because John can play Wipeout, and I'll just sit back, and then we'll go into Little Latin Loop-de-Loo, and I'll sing. So that was the first time I had no idea this was going to happen, but I was at the front of the stage, and Larry got on the microphone, and he said, John Marchese, can you come up here, and we want you to play Wipeout with us. Of course, I was ecstatic, so I jumped up on the stage, and I got on his drums, and I played Wipeout, and I got to tell you, I was good. And people were clapping because I was only 12 and a half years old. So that's how it started.
You had the music in you.
Yeah. And actually, I started playing 2 or 3 songs at each gig that they did.
With the Disciples.
Right. Until summer. And then I ended up playing drums for them.
Nice.
And
so the drummer could then go on and become the singer
full
time.
And he was a good front man. I liked Larry.
That's what makes a good band is you got to have a good front man. You got to have good musicians all around. But that front man really does collect people and draw them in.
Yep.
It really does. Who are some musicians that influence the development of your style of playing early on?
Okay, that's a real easy question to answer, but I have to lay a little groundwork first before I get there. Like I said, the 50s and the 60s were a boom of music. I mean, it was incredible that Elvis came and then the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were there, and the Lovin' Spoonful and Cream and Jimi Hendrix Experience. I mean, I can keep going on and on and on, but that music actually didn't attract me. And I know that's a mortal sin to some musicians out there, like, oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding. You weren't influenced by Eric Burdon and the Animals? Well, yeah, I was. But that's not what I was inside. I was feeling something different. So I tended to go towards big band.
Okay.
I really loved big band. My drum teacher, who we'll get into a little later, he was a big band drummer. And when I mean big band, is I mean 18 to 20 pieces, not a three or four piece. And so I was influenced with people like Louis Bellson. And well, I mean, some people know him. A lot of people, of course, wouldn't know him. He was big in the 50s and 60s. He was the father of double bass drums. And he was more or less like Gene Krupa. And they had these big bands. And by the way, he was a little white guy married to Pearl Bailey. And you want to talk about, oh my gosh, in the 50s, a white guy married to a black woman was just like, oh.
It's controversial.
Pearl Bailey, she's another one that broke my heart. I loved her. I loved her music. Billie Holiday. I mean, I was just sucked into that. Now, saying that, there was also one of my biggest influences was James Brown. Obviously, I mean, I'm a drummer. How couldn't you be? Why would I not be attracted to funk? Of course, they didn't call it funk back then. They just call it soul music. Yep. And whenever James Brown would come to town, I was right there at the Four Seasons Ice Arena setting up chairs. And I'm telling you, I did that for 3-4 seasons. And he remembered me. When he would come back, he would say, "Mr. John, how you doing? You're getting big." And I would just be stunned that this guy, this bigger than life, would remember who I was, a little guy to set up chairs. And one day he looked at me and he said, at one time he said, "I heard you play drums." And I said, "Yes, sir. I want to play drums for you." And he said, "I'd like that to happen, but that's not what our band is. We don't do that." And I knew what he was. I mean, I was only 15, but I knew what he was talking about. But he let me sit up in one of the drum sets, and I played for him. And he said to me, "How do you know how to play Fatback?" And I said, "I've been listening to you all my life." Man. I said, I am a soul drummer. Yep. But there was other guys. Buddy Miles. He had a great band called Buddy Miles Blues Band. He was the drummer for Jimi Hendrix before Jimi Hendrix went on his own. Jimi Hendrix was a great jazz guitar player.
Oh yeah, for a good while.
Yeah. And they had some great bands coming out of San Francisco, coming down to L.A., which, of course, I didn't get to L.A. until later. They were already gone. Matter of fact, they weren't even, Jimmy was already passed by then. Other bands, Weather Report, which was, wow.
Yeah, they're phenomenal. Like that band, I still love listening to them to this day, and that was appealed to me by your son, Matt.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. They were like bands like Weather Report, Mothers of Invention, Frank Zappa. They were more of a musician's music. If you weren't a musician, you couldn't understand what timing is that. You'd say, well, those are 7s and 9s, and they'd say, what? I'd say, well, it's not 4/4.
It's different.
So
it's definitely.
I said it's syncopated, and and it was just. And of course, I fell in love with it because that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that's where I ended up. That's what I am today. I love a mixture of fusion, funk, and jazz, and influences for that would be, a Sting. Dave Matthews would be that. Dave Weckl, who was an unbelievable drummer. Mike Stearns, guitar player, and his wife, Lenny Stearns. Tall. She's a bass player. Wickenfeld. My son loved her when he saw her. He just fell in love. Says, "Oh my gosh." That's another whole story. She's from Australia. She quit school I believe in her senior year, and said, "I'm going to America. I'm going to be a guitar player."
Wow.
So she came to America, and they said, you play guitar like a bass player, and that's what she plays today. And she is definitely fusion, funk, jazz. So, that's where I am today.
So you're influenced. Now, did you ever take lessons?
Oh yeah. Back in the 60s, that was a big thing. To be able to especially if you were in big band. You had to know how to read music. Matter of fact, I joined the Musicians Union. I think I told you I was 12, but I was actually 13 years old. And it wasn't that I wanted to join. I was made to join because you couldn't play in certain venues unless you were a union member. And in those days, you just didn't pay your money and join. you went to a board of 3 or 4 people and they questioned you, especially because I was only 13. They wanted to know, well, why do you want to join the musicians union, and you're so young? And so I went to this board, and they were happy. I guess all the answers I gave them, but they had to come and see me play. So I just happened to have a gig that weekend, and it was with a little band called the Charles D. Tommaso Trio. Might sound hokey, but in those days, there was a band at every corner fighting for a job. But fortunately, there were a lot of work out there. If you weren't playing some school dance, you were playing a CYO, which is a Catholic organization dance, or you were playing weddings. Weddings were huge, or you were playing parties. I tell you, there were a lot of bands, but there was more work.
See, that's awesome right there.
If you had to really suck as a musician not to be able to have a band and get work. So, and I was playing every weekend from probably 14 years old on. I don't think there was a weekend I didn't have at least 1 or 2 gigs.
Wow.
I was ripping my kit down, running to another gig. Anyway, so the musicians union, they sent a rep out to watch me play, and he said, "Wow, we really like what you're doing." And they said, "Did you ever think about taking lessons?" And I said, "To do what?" and he said, "Well, to really get professional." So I said, "Well," and he gave me a name of a guy. His name was Joe Blake. He was a drum teacher.
Okay.
And he said, "You may like this guy." So I drove over and I saw him, or I was driven over, I should say. My dad brought me over to meet the guy, make sure he was on the up and up. He wasn't weird. Didn't want to get people in his basement, which that's exactly what he did. He got people in his basement because that's where his little studio was. Well, we went down and Joe told me who he was, told me what he did. And he asked me what kind of music, and I told him big band. And he said, "Well, that's what I'm here for." So I started taking drums, and I think I took 2 lessons a week, and it was $2 an hour.
$2 an hour.
He said I was getting a good deal because he usually charged $2.50 for a half an hour.
So did you like just an hour lesson or 2-hour lessons with him?
I did 4 hours a week.
So 2 2-hour sessions.
Yep. And I got to the point where he said to me, "You know what? You're getting to a point where I can't." This was a couple of years later. He said, "I can't teach you anymore."
Oh, wow. That's the biggest compliment that you can get right there.
Well, I was 16 years old, and he said, there's a night club. It's a dinner club. And he said, "There's a band there that I play with." And he said, I want you to play that night." He said, I'm going to bring you out." And he gave me the sheet music, and I brought it home, and then I'd play it with him. And that's where I made my debut. And it was great. And then I knew, yes, big band is where I want to be. I love the horn sections. I could really just get, unless you've been with a big band, I can't tell you what it's like.
So did you start performing and start playing more gigs after that with big band, or? No,
actually, I never went. Believe it or not, yeah, we can get into that when I went to California.
Okay.
I did get to some big band jobs. But what happened then is my drum teacher said, "Look, you can play guitar." And I said, I know my chords, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And he said, to be a good drummer, he said, and people don't understand this, a good drummer has to know everyone else's instrument. Because he said, it's funny how you get a copy song and the guitar player does what he wants and the bass player does what he wants, but they'll always say to the drummer, "Well, didn't you listen to the record? Can't you play like him?" So they don't understand that a drummer has to learn. If they're doing a top 40 band, for instance, and I know we're getting on a rabbit trail.
Oh, no, I love it.
And drummers out there, you're going to know what I mean. You're in a top 40 band. You're not writing your own material. You're playing out, and the rest of the band doesn't understand that you have to know every drummer's style to every song. And it starts to get tired after a while. And that's why I couldn't stand playing top 40, because I had to learn to play the way they played on the song, or the band wasn't satisfied. It's okay, the guitar player couldn't do a riff.
But the drummer had to be the same.
Yeah, but the drummer had to be there. Like, I had to play Wipeout, What would a drummer sound like if he didn't play Wipeout like Wipeout? It wouldn't be Wipeout.
Huh.
But yet the guitar...
can do whatever he wanted.
Yeah, it never sounded like like the record. So, but that was okay because he was a guitar player. So again, back off the rabbit trail onto the guitar, is Joe said to me, look, I've got a friend, his name is Lou Dom. And he said, I told him about you, and I told him that you can play guitar pretty well. He said, but I want you to take lessons with him. So, and the reason why I didn't fight with Joe is because I got tired of hearing this. What? You're just a drummer. What do you know about music?
Ooh.
You know, and I'm sure drummers have heard this all the time. You're in the back, you're playing. Look at Ringo. Yeah, just sit there and just play the beat, Ringo, and that's all there is to it. So when I took guitar lessons for 3 years. So by then I knew all my majors, minors, diminished, augmenteds, flats, sharps, inside, outside. I mean, I knew them all. And I could tell a guitar player, I mean, I would stop in the middle of a song and say, I said, your G string is flat. You got to break. You're driving me crazy.
And I bet you that blew their minds. I bet that blew their minds that you knew.
It would piss them off.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I learned a lot of other things. I learned that you've got, back in those days, you got a lead guitar, a rhythm guitar, and a bass player, and all their pick techniques were different. And I would stop the song and say, guys, seriously? If you guys can't get the same, here, let me, and I grab the guitar and say, this is how you stroke. Bass player, this is what you would do. I'm the drummer. I'm trying to lay a beat back here, and you guys are nowhere.
Wow.
So you can tell that I was not the belle of the ball. I went through bands like you wouldn't believe. But the Disciples, I always stayed with them.
That's the one that you played Wipeout with when they pulled you up on stage when you were like 12?
Yeah. But the name changed as they got older. Now they're graduated high school, and I'm in probably junior by then, and we changed the name of the band to Lord Nothing and the Flies because it was a requirement to read that book. And I remember one of the guys said, so what year are you in high school? And I told him, he said, oh, are you reading? And I said, yes, we're reading Lord Nothing and the Flies. And I remember Larry turned and said, that's the name of our band.
That's stuck.
I'm Lord Nothing and all you guys are going to be flies. And that was great.
Oh man, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So you played with that band for how long? Like you said you played with them
until I graduated high school.
Okay, so you stayed with them for 2 years. Kind of playing to junior year, senior year.
Well, actually, I started with them earlier than that, but yeah.
Wow. So you started playing drums, took lessons until you were 16. And when you were still taking drum lessons, did you start taking guitar lessons, or were they two separate things? Like you stopped taking guitar lessons at 19?
No, I took them both at the same.
Okay.
And then it got to the point where Joe wouldn't even give me any. We went through the books and he said, look, this is what I want to do. I want to give you a 45 record and I want you to write the drum part down for me that you hear on the record, and then we'll take it and we'll compare. And that's what I would do. And then we would get to the point where Joe could play vibes. He had a beautiful set of vibes. And for you guys that don't know what vibes are, they're just a big set of, they look like a xylophone with tubes hanging down. And Joe would play the vibes and I would play drums with him. And that's what we would do for an hour.
Wow.
And just do all kinds of stuff. Yeah, and mostly it was for timing.
Yeah, you got to get your rudiments, you got your stuff down.
We would be in at 4/4, then we'd be in 6s, and then we'd be in 9s, and we'd come back to 5, and it would be cool. But he would want me to play with my rudiments, so he
can be able to, so you knew that you had met your goal.
Yep.
That you'd be a good drummer.
Absolutely.
Now, was this all while you were still living on the East Coast in Massachusetts?
Yes. Yep.
What led to that move to the West Coast?
Well, even though that Berklee Music School had started and a lot of music was coming out of New York and in New England, there was more in the West Coast. I mean, I think I was 7 years old when I knew I wanted to move to California because of the snow. I just wanted to get out of New England. I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to shed the accent. I know I still have one, but when you get to the West Coast, the first thing you do is you shed stuff like, I'm taking the car down because I have to go to the bathroom. They know where you're from. So
you had to learn to adapt. Yeah, got to fit in.
That's terrible to say that. So God bless you folks from New England. I wish I had the accent back again that thick. I said, it is coming back.
I have a Southern accent that every so often will pop up when I get around certain family members. Like I have a very neutral accent now that I worked on before I went to Ireland. But I'm kind of the same with you. Like, I like my accent, but sometimes you have to learn to kind of cut it on and cut it off.
Yeah.
Now, when you moved West Coast, like, what happened? What did you do? Like, did you just kind of pick up and go, or did you have something laid out?
Well, it's like my dad said to me that this is another rabbit trail. Now I'm out in the West Coast. It's 1971. And I thought, hey, you know what? There's only one way to go, and that's up. I said, if you don't make it here as a drummer, John, that means you weren't cut out to be a drummer. I mean, work is abundant. Everyone's happy. Bands are everywhere. But they were known for the recording end of it all. Of course, Nashville was too, but in a different way.
Yeah, different genres, different kind of places, yeah.
And all I wanted to do was, I saw that building, Capitol Records, and I said, that's where I'm going to be someday. Of course, I did a couple of gigs there, but mainly it was a studio called IAM out in San Bernardino. Was a recording studio that I played at. A lot of work. But little did I know the 70s was going to be the end of a great era. Okay, and what I mean by the end of a great era, I don't mean like music was ending or the best music was already composed and you'll never see it again. What I meant was I don't think anyone saw this coming, but it must have been around 1974, and I was in Las Vegas doing a gig, and I think I was playing with, I want to say, Sammy Davis Jr. And
you played with Sammy Davis Jr.?
It was just, I was just a drummer.
Still
filling in.
That's amazing.
And he was horrible. I remember the curtain closed and he was screaming at us saying, you guys call yourself musicians. And I just got up and said, you know what? You're on your own. I walked off. I didn't need to
Good to stand up for yourself.
So, yeah. Oh yeah. I was definitely, because I was a recording drummer. I didn't care about playing out at that point.
That's where your money was in the studios.
Well, it wasn't just the money. It was the idea that's where my heart was.
Gotcha.
I mean, yeah, sometimes you'd work, oh my gosh, 40, 60 hours in a row, and then you wouldn't see work again for 2 months.
Oh, wow.
But yeah. So I was walking through one of the lounges and I hear this piano player playing, but I could hear this beat. And I'm thinking, boy, that drummer sucks. And I couldn't find a drummer. So I just stood there and watched this piano player, and he ended, and I walked over to him. I said, where's your drummer? He said, oh, I don't need a drummer anymore. He said, I have a rhythm box. And I said, what? And he showed me this little box that made drum sounds. And I said, now how in the hell could that get by me and I didn't see that? I said, I've seen click tracks.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, most of the recordings I would do is only on 4-track anyway. That was a big deal.
Yeah, that was.
In the 60s, stereo was a big deal. But I mean, and this is another rabbit trail, but I mean, I'm in a studio and I've got 3 microphones on my drums thinking, wow, this is incredible. Of course, today, I run 13, 14 mics on my set, but oh my Lord. Well, when he said, this is what it is, and he showed me this thing, and it said rhythm something on it, and he said, I don't need a drummer. And I said, well, I take offense to that because I'm a drummer, and you just put me out of work. I said, you could have had a drummer in this gig, and he just laughed. So Little did I know he was on his way down too, because no one saw what was coming. Now, come late 70s, all of a sudden you get this thing called DJs, and they came right out of disco, which was terrible.
So this is the separation of not DJs like your radio DJs, but like the DJs, the people that are coming out to the house parties and coming out and playing music.
Yeah. And I don't think they called them DJs. They called them something else, and I can't remember it because I was so disgusted I didn't care. I just wanted to run them over with school buses. So yeah, it was heartbreaking because all of a sudden you get this one guy who comes in with a van, and he's got literally boxes of 45s and a fairly good sound system. And he's doing weddings and he's doing school dances. I mean, how can you compete with someone that has every record out there made when you have a band killing yourself to do the top 40?
Yeah.
He said so. And I'm maybe I'm wrong, and I'll take some criticism here, but all I know is this was overnight. Musicians there were too much work, and all of a sudden there was no work. Because why would you hire a band for $200 or $300 a night when you can get a DJ at that point for $100 and would play every song a kid would want?
In the exact version that the kid wanted to.
Yep. And I said, well, I'm glad I went studio because this is horrible. This is going to be. And I remember my drum teacher, Joe Blake, said, John, you start out playing weddings and you retire playing weddings. He said, everything in between is just cream.
Wow.
And I thought, that's weird. Why would I want to play weddings when I'm an old guy? I'll be like a super drummer by then. Now I wish I had those weddings to play.
You never know. There's still time left.
All right, Cade, I tell you, let's back up a little bit on this DJ thing. I didn't mean to imply that DJs had not come about until the late 70s. In the 50s and 60s, they had things called sock hops. And there were quite a few of them that they had people coming in and would just play records. Sometimes it would be a 45, sometimes it would be an LP. But it was more of a novelty because in those years, people still wanted to see live bands. I mean, let's face it, the British invasion came over and changed everything. Everyone wanted to see a live band.
And everyone wanted to be in a band.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And if they couldn't play an instrument, they still wanted to be in a band somehow. So what do? You get roadies, you get sound technicians, you get lighting technicians. I mean, it opened up a whole new thing, and everyone wanted to get involved somehow, because let's face it, there's nothing better than being in the light. Okay, so now we find ourselves again in the late 70s. DJs are taking hold. Jobs are going by the wayside for bands. It's getting to a point where it's getting really hard to find a job, because for every live band job, there's probably 20 bands fighting to get that.
Oh, wow.
And they're cutting their prices, or they're cutting their music, or whatever. And it got to a point where I just threw my hands up and said, I'm glad I'm going studio. I'm glad I'm in a studio. I don't have to put up with this. But my heart was breaking, because music was, you remember that? There's a song, it's a reasonably new song, and it was called,
Is this a video killed the radio star?
Yes. I love that, because that's what happened when DJs came in. But when I hear that videos kill the radio star, it breaks my heart, because actually it didn't, did it? Videos did not kill the radio stars, because now radio is back bigger than ever.
Yeah, it is.
So, and I'm happy, but I still love that song.
You even sometimes don't even need the radio anymore, because of with Spotify and all these other Bandcamp and stuff, that
right.
People are making these huge hits, YouTube and stuff, without not even having to be on the radio.
Right.
It's pretty crazy.
Well, it's great.
It is. Yeah.
It's called opportunity, and to seize it, you just have to know when.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing, to jump on it. Okay, so DJs have taken a lot of the common garage bands work. So what did you do next? Where did you go?
Well, by then I'm in a studio, so I'm working pretty steady. What I mean by steady is I have enough to pay my rent and to eat the 99 center at Fabian's restaurant, which was in Santa Ana. And yeah, it was owned by Fabian, the singer. Of course, I never met him there, but they had a breakfast, and it was the 99er, and you got 2 eggs and 2 pieces of bacon and a coffee for 99 cents. But if you got the $1.25, the $1.25 breakfast, that's when the waitress would tell me, "Oh, so we have work this week," because that's when you got a stack of pancakes with it. And I say, "Yes, ma'am."
That's amazing. That is funny. So you can be able to, get that extra bit of work. But as a musician, sometimes it's just, you got to make the payment for the rent, keep moving. Because you said sometimes you didn't work for 2 months, right? At some points?
Yeah. I think the longest I went was probably almost 60 days without any. But that's another discussion for another day. And by the way, Southern California was one of the last great holdouts, because there still were a lot of nightclubs and a lot of bands.
Yeah.
I played with one band. It was, how can I put it? Not what I expected. The guy's name was Filthy McNasty. And
okay,
they brought him into the gig, they would drive a hearse up to the front of the entrance, and they would pull out a casket, and we would be playing his theme song, and they would bring it into the club and set the casket up in the front of the stage, and it would open, and he would come out and start singing weird. All I remember was him saying, "I'm Filthy McNasty," and that's all I remember. And he would do this whole thing, and he was actually pretty good, but he would scare the hell out of me.
So it sounds like Alice Cooper before Alice Cooper was cool.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, well, I did play probably a couple of weeks with that band, and I couldn't do it anymore. It was just the people who came into the club were weird. So, but there was quite a bit of work in Southern California.
But there was probably a lot of competition, though, of the musicians trying to keep up.
Oh, there were garage bands, tons of garage bands.
Now, wait a second. You have a story about where the term garage band come from. I got to hear this.
Well, yeah, and that's actually, it's pretty simple if you think of it, garage band, garage. But growing up in New England, we heard the term. I mean, it was always used somewhere on TV or in a movie that you went to, but it never stuck because being in New England, we had basements. And that's what we always played, was in a basement. So we never had any trouble. But here I am now in Southern California, and we get a visit from the police department saying that we were too loud because we were playing in a garage. We were actually rehearsing in a band. And they told us that we had to lower the music down, that this woman had a baby next door and she couldn't get the baby to sleep. So I just kept thinking, there's got to be somewhere we can play, somewhere we could do this where we don't have to be hassled by police. And
that's for sure.
But that's where the term garage band came from, because in Southern California, the homes did not. 99% of the homes were built on slabs. They were just garages, no basements. So noise. And there were a lot of bands in Southern California. I mean, a lot of bands. DJs may have come in the 70s and killed it, but there was still a lot of nightclubs, like we were speaking about earlier.
Yeah.
That still honor the fact that they loved live bands. So,
because it's still making money. That's the key thing at the end of the day.
Right.
People still need that live atmosphere because it's a totally different world from listening to the album to seeing it in person.
Right. Which brings us to another whole genre that opened up in that period. A lot of musicians that couldn't find work. And this happened to me. It was just by accident. I was out having coffee and eating with some friends, and someone said, "Well, what about playing in church?" And I said, "What?" I mean, I grew up Catholic. The only thing you ever played in church was bells.
Yeah.
If you were an altar boy. And I said, what do you mean play in church? And he said, well, there's this church in Orange County that has like a live band every Thursday night.
Which is more common today.
Actually, let me back up on that. They had a small band on Thursday nights, but they had a live band on Saturday nights.
Oh, okay.
And I said, what do you mean by band? Like playing top 40? And they said, oh, no, they play gospel music. And I said, what, like a couple long hairs with a guitar? And they'd say, well, yeah, but no, they have like drums and amps and guitars. And I said, really? He said, well, why don't you come with us? And I said, well, is it a good place to pick up chicks? And he said, it's a church, John. I said, yeah. So what are you talking about? Everyone that goes there is a guy? And they said, no, you'll see when you get there. Well, this is something that we didn't talk about, but growing up in the 60s, I didn't do drugs and I didn't drink. And this might sound strange, but I saw it all from a point of view of not being stoned.
See, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, it could be, because people are going to interpret saying, no way I was there and it was like great. And I was like, yeah, well, I'm happy for you. But another thing, I saw a lot of drugs in the 60s, a lot of accidents, a lot of people died from overdoses. I don't know why it never took hold with me. I never liked it, never wanted it. Even alcohol, I just never craved it. So I became the, I guess I would go to parties, and sometimes there'd be people that didn't know me would say, well, this guy doesn't drink, man. He's a narc. Because in those days they had young guys that were actually police that would go to parties and bust you for doing marijuana or whatever they did. And they'd say, no, that's John. He's the designated driver. John doesn't drink and
Got to
do
have
drugs.
your role.
And my dad even mentioned it once to me. He said, you were either born 20 years before you were supposed to be born, or 20 years, you should have been born 20 years later. He said, but you don't belong here, John. You just don't fit in. And I didn't take offense, but I kind of knew what he meant. So anyway, so being back, going to this church on a Saturday, I went with my friend. His name was Frank, but I called him Lumpy because he reminded me of the guy from Leave It to Beaver, Lumpy.
Okay.
And Frank, by the way, was a great guitar player, and he wrote a lot of music. Matter of fact, people would come up to him and say, you should be a recording, because he didn't have the look for stage, but he had that radio face, and I loved him. And actually that's where I met him. That's another story, but I met him in a studio. And yeah, we'll get back to that because that's a great story too. Okay. So I'm at this church on a Saturday,
okay.
And these guys were, they impressed me. They were great musicians, and, the words were Christian, but they didn't offend me. Matter of fact, I felt pretty good. I thought, wow, this is kind of great. I don't have to worry about some guy, putting an LSD tab in my Coke or something like that. I said, this is kind of nice. I said, but why do all the women wear long dresses like down? I said, wow, they all look like throwbacks from the 1800s. They really did. That's what they dressed. That's
Interesting.
So, and I remember because they used to call them Jesus freaks in those days. And this was 1978, I believe. And I remembered Star Wars was already out, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
So I looked and said, no, they can't be Jesus freaks. They said they're Jezoids. I said,
interesting term.
We're going to space. I don't think that ever caught on, but
I've never heard it.
So anyway, to get back, I after the gig, I met the musicians, and these guys were same story that, video killed the radio star, and they were eaten up. They were doing great, and one by one, the bands were starting to go wayside because DJs were just killing them. They couldn't afford to go out. You can't take a band out for $200 anymore. So
yeah, that's going to take money. Yeah.
And he said he heard that the churches were starting to hire full-time musicians. And I said, yeah, but you're playing like for God. Why would you charge money? And I remember that never sat right on me. Maybe not on a Friday night or a Saturday night or a Thursday, but on a Sunday morning. So, and that's another whole thing for later because I don't want to upset people.
Yeah, that's whenever it gets to opinion bases, stuff like that, it's hard to be able to kind of decide because each person has their own beliefs in what they kind of follow by. And you have that right to your opinion.
Yep.
That's the key thing that I think we're missing sometimes.
Yep. But remember, musicians were starving. They just wanted to play. Even if they didn't get paid, they wanted to play. And it was sad to see, especially Southern California. The best of the best, weren't even getting jobs.
Wow, that's rough.
Yeah, and then it was who you knew and where you were. I was lucky. I had a gig at Disneyland in a small 4-piece band. Matter of fact, that's where I met my idol. Louis Bellson was playing, and when I came in and saw him on the roster, I said, "You got to be kidding me! He's playing like in the same stage I'm playing." Louis Bellson, my idol. And I remember I played, and he was such a nice guy. He came up to me and he said, "You're the drummer?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You're a really sweet drummer." He said, "I enjoyed listening to you." And I said,
"Wow.
You got to be kidding." I said, "You're the man."
And that's one of the biggest compliments you can ever receive.
Oh, that is absolutely true. To have your idol that you grew up with, listening to everything they've done, to actually come up to you and tell you that you passed. But I'll tell you, for every high, there is a low.
I can believe that.
I think I mentioned way back that I played at this dinner club that my drum teacher brought me out to debut me at 15. That was my low. The gig was great. Everyone on the gig actually enjoyed me. I was spot on. My timing, you could set your watch. I even ad-libbed. And the band leader actually looked at me and gave me a thumbs up because I put things that weren't in the music. And I took some stuff out that I didn't believe, complimented the music. But not much, just a little bit.
You're adding your twist, your flavor, your style.
So that was over, and I came down, and my drum teacher was there, and he said to me, hey, there's a famous drummer here. I want you to meet him. And when I say famous drummer, this guy was famous, and it wasn't Louis Bellson, which was my favorite, and it wasn't Gene Krupa, because he was another one of my favorite. It was the other big band drummer who had got an attitude so long that you could build a freeway on it.
Oh,
so
wow.
I won't mention his name. But I remember I was looking at him, and he was smaller than I thought, but it was actually, well, he was bigger than Louis Bellson, who I hadn't met in person by then. But he looked at me and said, so you're the drummer that was up there? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, you suck.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
And he didn't break my heart. But I looked at him and I said, my speed is natural. Can you say the same about yourself? And I remember looking at him and shaking my head like with a smirk and thinking, and I didn't think it. I actually turned around and looked at him again because he was stunned, because a table full of people were like, oh my gosh. And I said,
you're insulting the celebrity.
When I'm not your age, I'll be 3 times faster than you. And I turned around, I said, have a nice life, and walked off. And I was only 15 years old. Wow, and my drum
15.
teacher thought that was the best thing that I had ever, because this guy was so, his attitude, like I said, was a mile long. Just had an attitude. Matter of fact, I've seen interviews with him on other programs. And he is just always cutting someone down or saying something not nice about some other drummer. Thinking, you know what? You're not all that, man. You're stuck on one type of drumming, and that's all you do.
And that's unfortunate when people look up to you and you're over there and you're cutting people down. And that leads also for generations, unfortunate people that take that same attitude forward.
Yep. Instead of building up, like Louis said to me, I can't hold a torch. Louis can do paradiddles with his feet. Can I? No.
No.
But to take time and actually say, hey, I really enjoyed your drumming. Another drummer, a great drummer who was a teacher, my last teacher was Peter Erskine. He's a big band drummer. He is phenomenal. Now, I only took a few lessons with him personally, but most of it was later. You bought you got his music and you did it yourself at your own speed. But you could always be with him and say, hey, I didn't understand this. He said the same thing. He said, you are just really, I just love to hear you, John. He said, you just flow. And he said, I've actually learned things from you. And I said, what?
Whoa.
No, I don't think so. And whether they're true or not doesn't matter, but the idea that they took time to build you up, to say,
made
hey,
you feel good.
All this work that you're doing, all this effort you're putting in, it's not going by the wayside. I can hear it.
Yeah, you're not being someone else. You're being John.
Right.
And that adds an element new, and we can respect that.
So all I can tell you, musicians out there, is so when you come up against another musician who's starting out or is, don't try to pick on the things that he's doing wrong. Build him up and tell him what he's doing right before you try to critique him, because then they'll be open to it.
That's the same thing with teaching as well. You have to sit back and you got to give the compliments. You got to show them, hey, that, you may have made a 50, but you know what? That's a 50. That's not it's not a 40. It's not a 30. Look at what you're doing. And then say, hey, maybe this is where we can work on. It's same passion with any teacher, any musicians, any bits. You have to be able to help pave the way forward.
Right.
And that's the best way to do it.
So now we're back onto this, there's little or no work for drummers out there. I mean real work. And what I mean by drummers is garage drummers, drummers with good bands, but they're not up there at the Hollywood level.
Okay.
I started teaching. That's something that we didn't talk about.
No,
I did. I had 35 to 40 students.
What?
And like any student, half of them didn't even do their homework, and I started to get discouraged. So what I did was I broke it down to, I kept 10 of my best students and just dumped the rest. Nicely, I dumped them. But what I would do is, the first time they would come in for a lesson, I would have a set of drums in the corner of the studio, totally dismantled. I'm talking about lug nuts off the drums, everything, like a pile of junk.
Back to the bare basics,
Yep.
like
And
everything.
I could see the parents looking at those like, why would he leave a pile of trash like that in this little room? So I knew that they were going to ask me. So before they did, I would say, I see you looking at the corner with all those things there. I said, that's a whole set of drums. When your child can put every piece of that drum set together, that's when I'll start teaching him how to play a kit. Right now, he's on a practice pad with 2 sticks. And that's all he's going to do until he learns every name to every part of those drums and how to put them together.
That is extremely smart.
And they would
Because everybody wants to go in right now and just start going through and playing. I want to be this drummer. I want to be that person.
Yep. And they would do that. And they'd say, well, and of course, the first thing out of their mouth was, all right, you're charging $5 a half hour. How long is that going to take? And I'd say, oh, sometimes a month or 2. I said, it's up to your student, how much they want to put in. I'm going to tell you this. I charge this much a half hour. I usually give 45 minutes. If my student comes in and they have not done their homework, we're going to talk about anything but music. We're going to talk about baseball, which I could care less about, wrestling, how the traffic is on 405 freeway. I said, but we're not going to have a lesson. And I said, and if he skips it twice, then I'll ask you not to come back.
Smart.
I said, because this is only for children who really want to learn. I said, so I ended up having just about 8 students at the end that got, they passed me within a year or 2. And I had to send them away, saying, I can't teach you anymore. You're really good. Some of them were better than I.
But as you did, what happened with you, with your teacher, when he knew when you reached that limit, you have to say, hey, you've now outplayed me when I can be able to teach you.
Yeah.
Go forward.
Unfortunately, I didn't have any gigs to bring them to. I wish I did. Now, they did get to come to the studio and sit in and see what it was like to be a studio drummer. And everyone thinks, oh, studio is so great. It's not like you think. I'm in a room by myself, mainly, closed up, and communication, a glass window between me and some of the other band members. The early days of studio, we were all in the same. We just had petitions around us. But the studio that I worked, the first one in Santa Ana, I was actually in a room by myself.
So were y'all recording individually by this point, or were you still recording as a giant band separated
No, we were
out?
recording together. Mainly the voice, the singing was done. The voices were laid over. We only had a 4-track, and then we went to 8-track, which was, oh my gosh, the drummer's got 4 mics now. But we would have to play back. Like a lot of times I would play just a basic beat, and then on the next track, I would play maybe some congas or put in some cowbell or something later.
Cool. That's interesting.
Yeah. And then, of course, when it got up to 16 and just kept going, it's like, oh my gosh, this is like heaven,
Because you can think of all the little extra stuff to add on. You can add those little extra little pieces with the cowbell, with the congas that you may have not been able to do at the same time while you're playing the drums the first time around.
Oh,
we have the extra tracks.
Yeah, there's. Let me tell you something about music. You can never put enough cowbell in.
So Will Ferrell is telling the truth here. When it comes down to this, need more cowbell.
I played with this young kid, and actually he's the one that coined that phrase to me. I remember he got on the mic and he said, "Mr. John, you can never have enough cowbell, never." So.
Was also Christopher Walken in that skit on SNL? That's where my brain goes from. But Christopher Walken and Will Ferrell are in the studio, and it's "Don't Fear the Reaper," and he's like running back, and he goes, "You know what that song needs? You know what it needs? I've got this fever. I got this fever for more cowbell." And then Will Ferrell just walks out and just start hitting on it.
Oh, I have never seen that.
We're gonna have to pull that up for you. That is a classic.
Yeah,
it is a classic SNL skit.
Great.
Yeah. But that's cool that you never heard that, but that's something that's there. Good old popular culture as it travels forward.
Yeah, and I'm an old man. I thought I've heard just about everything at least once. So, well, maybe I have heard it, and I'm just old and forgetting.
I forget things every day, and I'm 33 years old, and I don't know what's going on. Yeah. I think that's a part of just life in general.
So anyway, that's one way I made up for not playing gigs or not having a steady studio job. I always had students, which was kind of great, because a lot of them got better than I did.
So out of those 8, how many continue going forward?
Oh, all 8.
All 8 continued?
Oh yeah, yeah. They all somewhere in, you know. And by the way, drums weren't their only instrument. I always took the 8 that I had always had another instrument, and I always pushed probably towards the end where if you've got to be taking piano lessons in order for me to give you drum lessons. If you don't know piano, and I would stress it. I don't expect you to pick up a piece of sheet music and read it and play it perfect, just to know your way around. That, okay, this is Happy Birthday, and you could figure out how to play it, and you knew where all the notes were.
So music theory.
Yeah. Okay, we can go back a little bit. I think I told you that I learned to play guitar because I wanted to understand more about where the rest of the band was going. I just didn't want to be. I couldn't stand that expression. You're just a drummer. Shut up. You don't know anything.
Yeah.
I mean, that was hurtful. So from that day when I was a young kid, that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to learn to play music, not just. And it's funny because when I meet other drummers, they'll get on my kit and they'll say, this one guy got on my kit and I didn't even know who he was, and he started laughing, and he turns to our keyboard player, who by the way has a doctorate in music theory, says to him, this drummer doesn't even know how to tune his drums. You got to be kidding. And I remember Zach turned and said, what did you say? He said, these drums aren't even in tune. He said, no, they're tuned in notes. And he said, what? He said, do you read music? And he said, no. And he said, then you won't understand. And I was there, and I think that was kind of hurtful for him. He could have said it another way, but I went up to this drummer and said, I'm the drummer. Let me show you what I did. I said, I take the common key that all the songs are going to be in on this set. And it seems like that's what he does. He always picks this certain, and I tune my drums to open E because that's the most common for everything. And I think I taught that drummer something that day.
You did. That's an element that most drummers would just be like, get off my set or something like that. But you took the time.
I said, I actually get the keyboard, and I tell him to give me an open E, and I tune one of my drums to that, and then I go off that, and I just go down or up an octave, whatever I want to do. I said, and I said, now listen to the way I play, and you'll see that it just flows with the music. It just, every drum I hit sounds like, wow, that should be there. I'm not overplaying. I'm not underplaying. I'm playing with the music. And
see, yeah, that's a piece of information that I rarely have ever heard. I've read through books, I've read through and listened to interviews and stuff. Mm-hmm. No one talks about that. Out of all the years I've been in, no one talks about that specific thing. So musicians listening, drummers, percussionists listens, that's a huge tip of information there that you will rarely get.
Yeah, drummers have this reputation of being, just bang that drum, smack that puppy. Let me hear that. That's not what it's about. What did your drums ever do to deserve being hit on that hard?
Caveman. It's caveman mentality.
I had people telling me, you got to mute your drum. No, I don't have. No, your mic. I don't have to mute my drums. I wait till. I had an engineer on my first studio that begged me to mute my drums. He said, these mics are going to pick up everything. And after we were done, he said, oh my gosh. He said, your drums were like perfect and you don't have any mutes. And I said, you just have to know how to tune them, what heads to put on for what you're going to be using, and how to play. So I love rim shots. I mean, other than cowbell, you can never put enough rim shot.
Okay.
But I can do it in a way where I'm not going to, the engineer's not going to scream that I just blew his eardrums off. Yeah, I take percussion serious. It's to me, it's an instrument.
And that's the cool thing you can hear in your voice. And whenever I'm recording, whenever you hear that passion, you hear that joy, that's the best part about doing these podcasts is hearing that. I'm going to pause us in our episode and we're going to pick back up here because we're at 1 hour and 10 minutes. I think it's important to give the listeners a break, pick back up with us next Monday, and we'll ride from there. As we're going out, everyone subscribe, follow, like, email me at cade@learningfromfriends.com. Cade is spelled C-A-D-E. And most of all, as your listeners are leaving, remember to let your curiosity fly high. My name is Cade Curtis with Learning from Friends.